Thank you for attending this session. Today is the fifth session in the Cloud Security Essential Training course. In the previous sessions, we covered multiple modules. First module, it was the architecture, concepts, and design requirements. And module 2, cloud data security. And in the cloud data security, we start to split the cloud components into categories. First category, it was for the data, and we discussed the cloud security basics for the data and how you can protect it, especially by using the encryption, the access control as the identification, authentication, authorization, and accounting. And we mentioned that the data is considered as the backbone of any solution, and you have to provide the full security controls to protect the data in all its status, even it's at rest or in transient or in use. In the third module, we covered the cloud platform infrastructure, and we mentioned that there are some standards which we are considering that the application or the data, it will not be secure unless the infrastructure and the storage are secure as well. We discussed the physical security controls for the data center and the servers, the hosting devices, and also we discussed the other controls relating to the infrastructure and especially the access of these devices for the networks, for the storage, and we mentioned again the importance of the encryption, where it will be considered as a good isolation method for the cloud services, since we are using the multi-tenancy concept in the cloud computing. Also, we discussed the or today, inshallah, we will discuss the cloud application security. In this module, we will concentrate on the concept of the application itself. The application itself. And of course, as you know, whatever any cloud solution, even it's ES, SaaS, or PaaS, or whatever, you have multiple components. First component, it will start by the infrastructure or the network or the servers, the devices which are provide the computing, the storage, the network, the external network access to the cloud service provider services. Then the application, where your application is running. Finally, you will reach to the level of the data. Today, we will discuss the application security. Then, let's have a quick awareness and understanding of the application security and the development basics and what are the common pitfalls for the applications. For the cloud development basics, we have to understand how you can develop your application. Of course, here, even if you are not planning for developing any application, or in other words, to use PaaS, but still you have to understand the concept. Why? Because by the end of the day, you have to utilize some sort of applications on the cloud service provider, and you have to understand what are the security safeguards required to protect your data and applications running on the cloud. First of all, if you can remember, in the previous sessions, we explained that all the services provided by the cloud service providers, it will be provided through an interface. This interface, which gives you the access to the cloud service provider infrastructure. Also, it will provide you the access to your data and applications. Then, whatever any service, it will be provided by the cloud service provider. It will be provided as an interface. It will be provided as an interface. And this is very important. Why? Because you have to understand that this interface, by the end of the day, it's a matter of application program interface. It's API. What do you mean by API? The API, as we mentioned, it's some sort of application, or sorry, not application, it's some sort of interface. And this interface, it will provide you the services for the administration, for the accessing the data, for accessing application, to provision servers, to provision resources, and so on. When all these interfaces act or work as API, then this API, it must be safe and secure. Otherwise, if the hacker, he is able to get control over this API by using any vulnerability in its design, this means that he will be able to have full control over your data and infrastructure as well. Okay. What are the common pitfalls which you can face with the application over the cloud? Number one, portability issues. Portability issues. These portability issues, we explained this concept in module number 1 when we discussed the architecture and security basics for the cloud. And we mentioned that portability, this means that the ability to move or migrate your data from one cloud service provider to another, or the application itself. Then portability, this means that you are able to migrate your data from one cloud service provider to another, or from one cloud implementation to another, from private, for example, cloud into public cloud, or vice versa. Then the portability issue is very important, because if you are not able to migrate your data and you have a lock-in to a specific cloud service provider, because this cloud service provider, he is providing some sort of features and data structure or application structure which is not standard, and you are not able to migrate it from one cloud service provider to another, then this means that you are stuck with this cloud service provider. And in cloud computing environment, we call this, it's a lock-in. Lock-in, and lock-in, this it will be a risk. Why? Because this means that you have to stuck to this cloud service provider, even if you are not satisfied about his service. The other pitfall is the cloud appropriateness. The cloud appropriateness, this it means the appropriateness of the service itself. That you have a cloud appropriate service. Cloud appropriate services, it's related to the, for example, the example which we explained before, as a hacker which he has a normal VM, and this VM, he is trying to make some sort of attack through this VM on the cloud service provider by utilizing some tools or scripts, which it will initiate more processes to engage processors and memories. When the VM, it requires additional processors, additional memory, and it will try to lease these resources from the source pool. And by the end of the day, if the cloud service provider does not configure the limits, then this means that he will be able to reserve a lot of resources on his VM, although it may not be right or legal, and he have to release these services, or in other words, these resources, it can be utilized by the users or the other users, and there may be some legitimate users when we are trying to access service, we will not be able to access the additional sources because these sources are engaged by the hacker. Integration challenges. This is one of the important issues. What do you mean by integration challenges? Integration means that you have to integrate between multiple services. Of course, each service, it's not a separate island. It's not working alone. But you may have some services, they are utilizing features from other services. For example, you may have an application like ERB. If you create an order, if you create a record or whatever, then it will be integrated with the email, then it will send you an email. When this means that the ERB application, it will be utilized with the email service. Or it may be a CRM. When if you create an account for a user, then it will send him a welcome message. It will inform him about the way to communicate with the company and how to update the user information, for example, and so on. Then there are a lot of services which can integrate it together and provide additional services and features for the users. If we are working in on-prem data center, integration, it will be very easy. It will be piece of cake. Why? Because everything is under your control. When if you face any problem in the integration between the services, you will be able to read the log files from both of them. You have to understand what is the cause of the problem, and you have to solve it. This you can get it from log file, you can get it from SIM server, from wherever it is, but by the end of the day, you have full control over the cloud, over the services which you are hosting in the cloud service, in the data center, sorry. But in our case here, if we are hosting all these applications in cloud service provider, you don't have full control over the logs of the application and services hosted by the cloud service provider. The cloud service provider, we have to work very close with you to understand the reasons of any errors or problems or any causes which prevent the applications to be integrated together. Then if you are having multiple services over the internet and you want to integrate them together, you may face some problems, and the cloud service provider should be active with you to provide you with the detailed information and the cause of the errors and help you to initiate the integration between these services. The cloud environment challenges. The cloud environment challenges, usually it will be similar as the integration challenges and the multi-tenancy. As we mentioned, one of the real challenge is the multi-tenancy. And you have to provide isolation. You have to provide isolation. Then, by the end of the day, your application, it's running in a VM, but this VM, it's not isolated. It is not isolated if you did not provide the additional safeguards and security controls to isolate it as encryption or whatever, any other method. Then this application, it can be accessed by any other tenant, even by mistake, or due to a bug in the application itself, where it provides access for the user, although he is not authorized to have this access. Because by the end of the day, all of you are sharing the same host or physical infrastructure. It is a single host. This host is split into slides, and each slide is used by a VM. Then by the end of the day, again, this means that all the users are accessing the same device, the same hardware. When if there is any problem in one of these applications, and this problem causes, for example, buffer overflow or whatever, we don't know what will be the results of this bug. And in some situation, it may allow some users to read the data, which it's hosted in the RAM, which means that users or other tenants, it will be able to read your data. Finally, the cloud development challenges. Again, the cloud development challenges. What are the cloud development challenges? Cloud development challenges, one of the main challenges for the cloud that we are using the up-to-date platforms. We are not using any old-fashioned programming languages. We are using the new programming languages, libraries, features, and so on. Then this means that your team must be ready and we must have enough experience and information about these new technologies. Also, in some situation, you may find that in your organization, if you are developing your application, the developers and the project managers, we are familiar with the software development life cycle. We are familiar with it and we know exactly what are the steps and how we can initiate the process of understanding the requirements and how to make the coding, testing, and so on. They have the experience to do this exercise on site because they did this many times, and they have the experience and the practical experience as well in the field. But with the cloud development, it will be something different because this relatively new infrastructure for them, and we have to make the adaptation for the software development life cycle to be able to manage the host or the cloud development challenges. These are the most common pitfalls for the development or the application security in the cloud service and cloud computing. Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, excellent. Now let's have a quick look on the software development life cycle. Do you hear? Did you hear this expression before, SDLC? Do you know anything about it? What is SDLC?
It's the software development process steps, starting from your requirements design, and it goes through different phases until it reaches the development.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the right definition. And the SDLC, it is the software development life cycle process, because as you will see now that if you want to develop an application, it's very important, number one, to understand what are the business requirements, why the business wants this application, and what are the differences it will provide to the business. When you will understand this, you will be able to make or develop this application, and it can achieve the business requirements and expectations as well. In some situation, if you are collecting the business requirements in improper way, then the results, it will be very disappointed. Why? Because the business or the management, we are expecting something and you are not able to deliver. On the other hand, it is very important also to integrate the users who will use this application in your understanding phase of the requirements. Users, we are the, I will not say the owner, but we are the most important factors in understanding the business requirements, because we are the first line who are working with the application and the software, and we know exactly what is required and what is expected. Then, if you want to develop an application in a professional way, which it will follow the software development life cycle, you have to follow 6 processes. What are these 6 processes? Number one, you have to gather the requirement. You have to gather the requirement, and as we explain it, to understand the business requirements. And also to understand or to study the visibility. Is it possible? Because in some situation, users may ask you for something which it can never be happen. For example, we will tell you that we need this application which it will be able to make some process for huge size of database within few seconds. May not be possible. Or we want to achieve these requirements. This means that we require extra hardware or services or tools which it may be expensive, and the management, they will not approve these resources because the benefits which it will get, we will get from the application, it will not balance the expenses which we have to pay for it. Then phase number one, you have to gather the requirements and you have to check the visibility of these requirements. This is very important, because this phase, as we mentioned, if you are not able to gather the right resources, the right information and requirements, and to study it properly, then by the end of the life cycle, when the application is in production, there will be disappointing feedback from the users, from the management, and this be considered as the project, it will be failed. Also during the gathering and visibility process, in some situation, if you will see that the application, it will not be able to provide the features required by the users and by the management, then you have to say, okay, I am really sorry, this application, it will not be work. Then, do you want me to continue? For example, they will tell you, okay, we want this application to be run 24/7. Okay, you want this to be run 24/7, that's great. We can provide this for you. But what is the main problem? The main problem that if I want to provide you this feature, then this means that I have to get hardware, I have to get software and all this information, it will be very expensive. It will be very expensive because if you want to provide additional hardware, it will be expensive. If you want to provide redundancy, again, it will be expensive. If you want to provide all this feature, again, it will be very expensive, and it may not deserve to continue the application, and you have to say, okay, thank you very much. We have to stop this application. Okay. In other situations, the other phase which we may find is the requirement analysis. You have to make the requirement analysis. You have to make the analysis. What are these analyses? Of course, you collect some important information from the users, from the management, from the business owners, and you did your exercise in proper way for gathering the information. Now you have to analyze these requirements because usually, you know, the users, we are not aware about the terminology of our environment. When they can provide you some information in a business format, but you have to put it in a format which it will be able to be considered in the development cycle. You have to make the analysis for this information, and you have to understand if this information or requirements, it will be reasonable to be designed and coded. Phase number 3, it will be the design. You have to make the design of the application itself. This design, for example, you would say, okay, I will have, for example, the service, I will have a web server, and the user, he will be able to connect to this web server through the internet. And this web server, it will be connected to the application. This application, it will be developed, for example, by .NET or whatever. When this application, it will be able to access a database. This database, it will be hosted on SQL or maybe Oracle or whatever. This, it will be considered as a design. Also, we mentioned that the user, he may ask for some redundancy. When this means that all these services, I must have, for example, another web server here. When you will have 2 web servers, 1 and 2. But how this it will work together? They will work together if you have here, for example, a load balancer. This load balancer, it will receive the connection from the user, and it will check which web server is free. When it will send the data for this server, and these servers or the applications, you will find that the web server, it have to send the traffic into any free application server, and this application server, it should access the database and so on. This, it will be considered as the design. After you finish your design, you have to start the coding. You have to start the coding. And by the way, it is known that this process, it is almost the longest phase in the service development life cycle. This process, it is considered the longest software, longest phase or longest process in the software development life cycle. During the development, and I am saying during the development and coding, not after, usually what will happen? The application, it will be split into multiple parts. It may be split into 2 or 3 or 4 parts. And when you integrate all these parts together, it will provide you the overall application. Each part of the coding, it will provide a specific feature. During the development, you have to make the testing for these parts, each one as a separate part. Don't wait until all the parts, it will be finalized and it will be integrated together in the same time. This it will not work. This it will not work, because if you faced any problem after the development, then the correction of this problem, it will cost you time and money. When during the development, you have to do the testing. You have to test each phase as alone, and to make sure that all the phases are properly developed and coded and they are providing the features required. Then you have to integrate these parts together. You have to integrate all these modules together and make the final testing for this application as overall, and make sure that it works fine and provide the features required. Of course, there is no need to tell you here that security, it must be a part of each phase. Security here, it must be a part of each phase. What I mean, during the requirements gathering, you have to consider the security countermeasures. If you have to keep some security controls of the applications, you have to check the input fields. For example, if there are some input fields in your application, you have to mention that these fields, for example, it will consists of text only. Then the application should check the type of the entry, and if it's something like other than the text, then it have to reject it and it have to inform the user to make re-input, and this re-input should match specific type of inputs and so on. In the analysis phase, again, security is very important. You have to consider the security in the analysis phase, and all the components must be secure in the design as well. In the coding, it's very important. Again, you have to make the application secure. Till you reach to the testing phase, you have to check the security. For example, as we will understand, there are some important sorry, I think my internet, there was a problem with my internet. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good, excellent. Okay, then in the testing, we have to consider some security attacks, which it can be arranged against the applications. And these security attacks, we will cover a lot of them during the next few slides. Finally, we have the maintenance. Now you have the applications developed, tested, when you can implement it and its operation. During the operation of the application, you have to make a maintenance, because when you finalize an application, it does not mean that this is already the closed or the task it's accomplished and completed. No, because if you have any application, you may discover some bugs, you want to have some more features, you have to make some additional changes and so on. Then it will be in the form of maybe fixes, it may be patches and so on. Then you have to take in your consideration the operations and the maintenance of this application as well. Usually, you may find other phase which it may not be mentioned here, but it may
Usama,
be.
I have a doubt. Like the previous slide, you mentioned about the phases and the methodology. It's like you have been describing about like an agile methodology, right?
Sorry, can you repeat this the way again?
No, the phases of SDLC, you have mentioned the phases of SDLC, but the methodology, what you tried to explain is agile methodology.
Okay. Okay.
No, this agile methodology, could it be explained a little bit?
Unfortunately, I will not be able, because the agile methodology, it's not related to security. Agile methodology, it's related to project management.
Yeah, okay.
And this, it will not be covered under the security or the development. When this, it will be some sort of project management, but by the end of the day, to use it as agile methodology or to use it as normal methodology, this, it will not make any difference for the SDLC. This, it will not make any difference for the SDLC. For the SDLC, I want my application. Okay, but the agile, this, it will be considered as a project management methodology, and unfortunately, I will not be able to cover it in this course.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You are most welcome. Okay. How we can apply the secure software development life cycle for the cloud infrastructure and computing and application hosting? Okay. This is a very important slide. Okay. Did you hear about OWASP? Did you hear OWASP, OWASP? Did you hear this expression before?
Yeah.
What is it?
Open Web Application Security Project.
Can you repeat it again?
It's Open Web Application Security Project.
You are right. And what is OWASP?
It talks about this top 10 vulnerabilities. Okay. And it has a web application firewall where you can run certain things, like whatever be the vulnerabilities here that's been listed, you can cross-verify it over there. And these people have a list of vulnerabilities, like whatever that comes up as a vulnerability, they keep posting the vulnerability.
Excellent. This the right answer. OWASP, my friends, it's Open Web Application Security Project. It's a non-profit foundation, non-profit organization. And this organization, it's working on understanding the web applications and what are the common vulnerabilities on the web applications. And usually they are publishing top 10 vulnerability in the web browsers. These vulnerabilities are very important, and you have to keep an eye on these vulnerabilities because it will help you too much to understand what are the problems and the threats which you may face for the web applications hosting environment. The top 10 for the OWASP, which are published, I think, recently. Frankly speaking, I don't have the date of the publication of these vulnerabilities, but they are up. I don't want to say up to date, but they are recently published. They are 10 vulnerabilities or attacks. Number one, the injection. What is the injection? The injection, it is some sort of inserting a command in any application field. For example, you have an application. This application, it requires you to enter any information or anything. You have to enter username, information, whatever it is. But the hacker, instead of entering the information, he will not provide an information. He will provide a command. This it will command, it will be executed on the server. If this command, it will be executed on the server, and of course, the application does not expect that there will be any comments. It will run on it. In some situation, it may fail, and it will provide a lot of information, especially if this information hosted in a database. Then it will provide a lot of information. Some situation, it will provide the information as a record, or in some situation, it may provide the contents of the database itself. Injection, it's not only restricted to the database. It's not only restricted to database. Usually, I am quite sure that you heard this expression before, the SQL injection. SQL injection, because we will try to run SQL command in the application entry field. But again, I have another type of attack for the injection, and it can be for the authentication, which it can be used for the LDAP injection. Again, the LDAP, as you remember, we mentioned that the LDAP, it will host the user credential attributes, which it will be used for authentication, authorization, and accounting. And this information, it will be very critical for the user. And if this information, it was provided to the hacker, then it can represent a crisis for any organization. In the injection, we have two types of injection. It will be SQL injection, and it will be LDAP injection. And I am quite sure in the future, we may find other types of the injection attacks. The other attack, or the second one, it is the broken authentication. What is the broken authentication? Broken authentication, you know, if there is any application, if you want to access it, you have to provide the username and password, or whatever the credential which you have to authenticate. In some situation, applications, it may have a token, or it may have a ticket, and this, it can be hosted by the browser in a form of caching information. If there is any hacker, he was able to cache this token or the ticket or whatever the type of the authentication method it will be used, then this means that he will be able to access the application. Sensitive data exposure. One of the other problems which you may face with the web browser is the sensitive data exposure. You may have a sensitive data, and this data, it may be exposed for hackers. Hackers, it can capture the packets, and this traffic, it can be intercepted, and the users, he will get very valuable data, which it can be used against your organization. Let me ask you a question. For example, the sensitive data exposure. What are the safeguards which you can configure for your application to prevent any data exposure? Any answer? How you can protect your application traffic from sensitive data exposure attack?
Encryption.
You are right, encryption. Because if the data is encrypted, then this means that the hacker, he will not be able to access the data. Then what he will get, it will be packet capturing, and in the data field, it will be some garbage, and he will not be able to read it or get any valuable information out of it. The attack number 4, it will be the XML external entities. Unfortunately, some developers, they will use some wrong techniques in the development, where they have to point to pointers to the external entities, and these external entities, it will give the hacker a full image or idea about how the application is developed, or for some libraries, or for some runtime libraries, and this it will be utilized by the hacker to penetrate the network. When this means that the developer, they have to be very careful. They must not have any external entities, pointers to any external libraries of software, libraries or whatever. Then the hackers, it will not be able to utilize it to access their applications. Broken access control, it is something similar to the broken authentication. The access control, it will provide the authentication, authorization, and accounting. Maybe in the first one, it was only authentication, but in the access control, generally, it will be authorization as well. When if there is any broken access control by the hacker, he will be able to take over the authentication process and authorization, and he will be able to access your application. The attack number 6, it is the security misconfiguration. Security misconfiguration, this is considered one of the main problems which we can face it. And sometimes it's misconfiguration, or it can be the default configuration. You know, in some devices or applications, you may find default credentials for administrator, for example. When this is the first thing the hacker, he have to check. He have to check the default administrator. When if you are not a good security administrator and you did not rename your account and change the password, then this means that the hacker, he will be able to access your machine. Or if there is any mistake in the configuration, for example, if you are configuring a firewall, during troubleshooting a case, you enabled the rule allow any. For example, in your firewall, you want to see if the application, it will work, or it's actually stopped by the firewall. But after you finished your exercise and you discovered that the application, it's not working for specific reasons, you forgot to remove this command. Then this means that your firewall now, it's enabled everything. Whatever any traffic it will come, the firewall, it will not check it, because the first rule, it was permit IP any. When this means that it will be able to bypass any traffic. Attack number 7, or the vulnerability number 7, cross-site scripting. And this, it will be used if there is any hacker, he is able to access your browser, and he will type some comments in the browser, and these comments, it will run on a server. Then he will be able to access the applications and the data on the server as well. Using components with known vulnerabilities. Again, this is very important. And of course, if you have any hardware or software, all these devices are running over software, and this software will have some bugs in the development. And usually the manufacturer, they are discovering these bugs, and they will issue some fixes. You have to update the application or operating system or hardware fixes and patches, when you make sure that we are running under safe mode and in a proper situation. Last one, it is the sufficient logging and monitoring. Insufficient logging and monitoring. As we mentioned, logging and monitoring is very important for the security people because these logs, it will be used to analyze the traffic, to understand the type of the traffic, if there is any attacks or any misaccess for your network, when you will be able to respond for it. And just imagine if you are not monitoring the network or the application access, then this means that you will not be able to stop it. You will not be able to do anything. And the hacker, he can enter your network and there is no logging for his activities, and in some situation you may not know that there is actually a hacker, he logged to your network, or he is still resident in your network. It's very important to note that most of these attacks are very simple, they are well known, and the solution for these attacks, it's not complicated. The solutions are very simple, but unfortunately, the security administrators, they are not doing their exercises properly. Yani, for example, in the injection, SQL injection, this SQL injection, it's a very, very old attack. We are hearing about SQL injection maybe 10 years ago. Then why is still showing up in the OWASP vulnerability list, although it's updated since 1 year or maybe less? Because security administrators, they are not doing their exercise properly, they are not updating the applications or the databases or whatever the services with the proper patches and fixes. Also for the broken access control, the broken authentication, you can use, for example, 2FA or multiple factor authentication. This resolves the problem. What about the cross-site scripting? It's the same as the injection attack. Old vulnerability, and it can be resolved by using the proper updates of the application, of the service, or the patches or fixes. Security misconfiguration. I think this is very basic for any security administrator. He have to check the default configuration, for example, and he have to follow the change management procedure or process in making configuration for devices or security devices. Then why still we are facing the security misconfiguration problem? Or why do we have the using components with non-vulnerabilities? If you are non-vulnerabilities, why you did not load the patches? Why you don't have sufficient logging and monitoring? Although there are some syslog servers, it may be for free, you can download it and you can collect your logs, or you can make some investment, which is very important, and you can have a SIM solution, which it will be able to collect the logs from other devices and you can analyze these logs. These are very important, and this list, it will give you a shock and surprise why we security administrators, they are not doing their exercises properly, and they are giving the chance for the hackers to access your network and access the services and data. From our experience, we found the answer is very simple. Users, security administrators, we are afraid to make any changes in their infrastructure. They are afraid to make any uploads or anything on their production environment when the operations, it may be affected, and the business, it may be affected. Or some of them may be not qualified enough when we can follow up the updates. Just imagine the security administrator. I think people who are working in operations field, this considered piece of hell from my point of view. I have to be aware about the bugs in the desktop operating systems. I have to be aware about the bugs in the server operating system. I have to be aware about the bugs in Windows, about bugs in hardware, software, services, application, databases, whatever, any piece of device. And you may find hundreds of these devices in your data center you have to be aware about. Then if you want to know the list of bugs of each one of them and how you can fix this, it requires a lot of time, and you have to be dedicated for your exercise, you have to be qualified, you have to join a lot of security groups, you have to share your information with security community and so on. And you have to have a contact with consultancy services, third-party consultancy services, which they will provide you the information and what are the new list of attacks and risks and how you can resolve these attacks and how you can solve it and so on. Okay. These are a list of the OWASP development life cycle vulnerabilities.
Osama.
Okay, yeah.
The slide before, could you please give an insight on insecure deserialization? That one I couldn't get through.
Okay. Insecure deserialization, this usually it is used for in application development to have what we can say let's go back to the question from Divya for insecurity deserialization. The insecure decentralization, this is a vulnerability. This vulnerability, untrusted or unknown data, it's used to issue denial of service attack, coding, or bypass authentication, or abuse any logical behind an application. In other words, in serialization and deserialization are safe. We are safe. Common process in web application. We are common process in the web application. But in some situation, the hacker, what he is doing, the attacker or the hacker, he will abuse the decentralization process. If it's not secure, of course, but if it's secure, then we don't have any problem. Then he will be able to collect the data and change it into object or from object to the data, and this will consider an attack. Then he will be able to take the information of the data and he will transfer it into the object, which is called the deserialization. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Let's have an overview on the cloud-specific risks. The cloud-specific risks, data breaches. Of course, we know the data breaches. Data is available, but it is not confidential. It is compromised, and unauthorized user, he was able to access it. It may be through clear text access through the network when it is exchanged between the client and the cloud service provider, or it may be accessed on the storage where it is stored. Insufficient identity, credential, and access management. I think we discussed this a lot, and we mentioned about the IAAA, and we said that the authentication, authorization, accounting, you can use 2FA or multiple FA when you can protect your network. Insecure interfaces and application program interfaces, system vulnerabilities, account hijacking, malicious insiders. And these malicious insiders, of course, it will be in the form of disgruntled employee. These are the employees who are working in the cloud service provider's infrastructure, and we have valid credentials, and we will be able to access the data. Although, of course, we have NDA and all this stuff, but by the end of the day, still the human being is considered the weakest point in the security chain, and they may be be looking for revenge from their organization, and we may steal some data. The best way that if you are able to encrypt the data and keep your key management in your organization, when this means that no one will be able to read your data, but by the end of the day, again, in some situation, you have to unencrypt the data to be processed, and in some situation, it can be captured. Advanced persistent threads. Advanced persistent threads, and it is called APT. With APT, it is some sort of hackers, or I am usually calling them patient hackers. Patient hackers. What I mean by patient hackers, these are the hackers which we have enough time. Usually, the hackers, we are looking for fast and quickly access and taking data. But for the advanced persistent threads, we are very patient. We have the tools where they send it to you by email or website or whatever, and these tools, it will be hidden and it will be installed on your network, and these tools, it will have backdoor for the hackers to send the data or send them their activities, and we are monitoring all your access. And in some situation, we just monitor. We are doing nothing. We are just monitor the access of your data and your application until they find a vulnerable situation which we can take over, and we can steal your data or steal the application. Or of course, the worst case, it's not just stealing, but to maintain their availability and upgrade or escalate their access and use the access as administrator password to take over the administration tasks of the infrastructure. APT, it is considered very, very dangerous risk. And just if you had a look on the name, it will explain to you the meaning. When we say advanced, it means that the hackers, we are really educated. We have an excellent experience and knowledge about the computer and attacks, and persistent because they will have or maintain their persistence on the network. And this, it can stay for months until they get their target out of your network. Data loss. In the data loss, your data, it's lost. It's not like the data breach. Data breach means that the data is compromised, although it's available. Still, the data is available on the hard disk, but it's compromised. Hackers, they was able to access it or steal it or whatever. But in the data loss, it is lost. The data is lost. It can be deleted. It can be hacker, he will encrypt it. For example, you know, the ransom attacks, where the hacker, he will have software, it will be installed on your machine, it will encrypt your data, and they will send you that you have to pay some money for them, then they will provide you the key, then you will be able to decrypt the data. In this case, we can say that the data loss. Insufficient due diligence. We discussed the due diligence, and we said that it will be the exercise which you have to do it to secure your data. And in some laws and acts in US and Europe, if you are not doing your exercise properly and you install the security controls and doing the due diligence properly, then you may be in jail. Abuse of cloud services, the example of the hackers, which he rent a VM and he tried to engage most of the resources of the cloud service provider by installing some tools or scripts, which it will require more processing or memory out of the shared resource pool. Denial of service. We are familiar with it. By the end of the day, service, it will be not be accessible. It may be due to network denial of service or processor denial of service or memory denial of service, whatever the type of the denial of service which the hacker, he will be able to arrange. shared technology issues. As we explained today, the memory problem, if you have a buffer overflow, then whatever any data in the memory, which it may be for multiple users, all the users, we will be able to see this data, because we cannot expect what will be the behavior of the application if the memory is corrupted by a buffer overflow, and the hackers can see the whatever any information hosted in the memory for multiple tenants. Any questions? Okay. It's very important to have a test for your application before put it in operation. This is very important. And unfortunately, people, we are not caring about this testing, although it is very important. Of course, you have to take security in your consideration during the testing. Security, it's not nice to have. Security, it's mandatory. You have to consider the security from the moment of collecting the requirements, the analysis, the implementation, the coding implementation, and the operation. We have two types of testing here. One of them is the functional test. What is a functional test? It's a functional test as we explained in the earlier slides. Your application, it may have or may be split into multiple modules. Suppose that your application is somehow complicated. We have 5 modules, and each group of the developers, he will work on one of these modules. We work to develop it. Then the functional testing means that you have to take each one of these modules and test it, and to make sure that it is configured and it's developed properly, and we are providing the functions as it should be. When this application, for example, the module 1, it will provide the user access to browser. Number 2, it will allow the web browser to access the database. Number 4, it will allow the user to enter data, and this data, it will be stored on the database, and so on. Then you have to make sure that all the functions are working properly, secure, and safe. Then you have to integrate all these modules together and test the application as overall. Then to make sure that the application, it will achieve the objectives and the requirements which are highlighted and mentioned by the top management and the business owners and the users. Okay, this first type of testing. There is another type of testing which I want just to know about it, although it's not mentioned here, but this is again important one, which is called user test. The user test, this is a normal user access for the application. Now, all these tests which we discussed about the functional test and all this stuff, it will be done by the development team. We have to make sure that the applications are able to each other. The web browser, it's able to see the application browser. The application browser, it's able to see the database. The database, there is another copy of the database in another location for HE, and there is, for example, a load balancer here, and this load balancer, it will load balance the traffic between 2 web servers, and so on. Then these, all of them, it will be done by the functional testing by the development team and the operations team. But when we will speak about the user testing, they will utilize this application as a user. This application, it's up and running, it is tested, and there will be a user, he will come and he will try to open the application, open some records, enter some records, save data, retrieve data, print reports, the normal operations, because of that is saying user testing. The user, he will do this exercise. He will do all the tasks which this application should do it. But if this application is able is able to fulfill the user's needs, requirements, and all the operations he is expecting, then this means that the application passed the testing, even its functional test or user test, and it is ready to be implemented in the operations. But if it's failed for any reasons in functional testing or user testing, then the developer team, they have to come back again. We have to check the failure and what are the reasons and try to fix these problems. Okay, in the functional testing, we have some type of testing here. We have some type of testing in the functional testing itself. We have the dynamic application security testing. We have the penetration testing. We have the runtime application self-protection. We have the static application, and we have vulnerability scanning. The dynamic application security testing, this it will be applications testing by the users from outside. It will be from outside the organization. We have no information about the application, and we are trying to access this application from outside. And test the application. It is some sort of similar to the penetration testing. The penetration testing, again, what is the difference between penetration testing and dynamic application testing? In dynamic application testing, we try to find the bugs and the problems as a hacker he will try to do. Or we try to discover whatever any vulnerabilities in the application, but from outside the company, In the penetration testing, the objective is totally different. The objective is that the entity which it will do the penetration testing, its objective that it wants to get the service down. This is the intent of the hacker. I want to get the service down. Then this is their intent. In the dynamic application security testing, we want to discover the vulnerabilities and to find out what are the weaknesses in the application. In the static application security testing, this is the opposite of the dynamic application. In the dynamic application, the test, it will be considered as black hat, the entity which it's doing the test, we have no information about the application, and we are trying to discover the vulnerabilities and problems. The entity, and we are outside the organization. Here we are outside the organization. And also for the penetration testing, we are again outside the organization. For the static application security testing, we are inside the application, inside the organization, and it is white hat testing. This means that the entity or the person who is doing the test, he has full information about the application, and usually he have an access to the code and he is reviewing the code. And frankly speaking, this is considered the best way to discover the attacks, but unfortunately it will take long time and a lot of money and resources. But if they will go through the codes and discover vulnerabilities, it will provide an excellent output for discovering all the bugs. Vulnerability scanning, it will be done from inside the network. There are a lot of tools which it can run and discover the vulnerabilities. And of course, we have the vulnerability scanning, and we have some other tools which it will make the vulnerability management. When it will discover any vulnerabilities, then it will provide you with the recommendation and the fixes. It can be loaded. In some situation, you can upload these fixes from the internet, or you can download it into a centralized server, and you can test it in production area. Sorry, in development, in testing area, and if it passed the test, then you can load it in the production. It is very important to understand that if you are a security administrator, you need a testing area. If you are a security administrator, you need a secure testing area. Because usually if there is any fixes or patches are announced and the security administrator, he knows that these patches are available, they are afraid to upload it because they are afraid that they may affect the operation of the network, and this it will cause a crisis for the operations and for the organizations. But if they have a testing environment, then we will be able to load it. We have to check if they faced any problem. We have to find a solution. We have to call the manufacturer. When we are ready, then we can do the exercise on the production very easy. When from our experience, any organization which it will have a production, testing, and the development environments which are totally separated from each other. Again, I am repeating, this production, development, and testing, they have to be separated totally from each other, even if it's not physically, but at least it will be on a different network segments or zones, and this it will provide really good stability and good results for the security posture of the organizations. The cloud application architecture. Okay, here we are speaking about some supplementary security devices. Unfortunately, there are some applications it was developed while security it's not in mind, and they don't have the security controls in mind, and they are considered full of I don't want to say bugs, but vulnerabilities. Then we are trying to make some supplementary security devices. And these security devices like firewalls to protect the application, web application firewalls, where the web application, these are layer 7 firewalls, and it will take all the HTML and XML applications, and it will analyze it and make sure that these applications are, traffic are clear and we don't have any bugs. Again, XML appliances, these are the appliances which it will make a check on the XML traffic. If there is any data, it should be entered by the user. Then what these devices it will do, it will take this traffic, it will analyze the data input and make sure that it's not contains any command, as we mentioned in the SQL and LDAP commands, and it will make sure that this traffic it is safe before it reaches to the application. In some appliances for XML, it will be used for security firewalls, or it may be used as the device for checking the traffic before reaching to the applications. Then all these devices, it will be considered as compensating security controls for the application if the application it's not providing the proper security controls during the design and the coding. Cryptography, I think you are familiar with the cryptography. Sandboxing. Sandboxing, this it's another concept where it will be able to isolate a specific application from the production. Then it will act as a separate area where this production application, it will work in a specific area. Then even if there is any attack or problem in the operation or its corruption or whatever, it will not affect the overall production. It will affect only this area where it is run, and usually this area where these applications are run, it will be totally isolated from the production area. Application virtualization, it is usually similar to the servers virtualization, but here the same concept valid for the application. Okay, any questions? Okay. IAM, Identity and Access Management, I think we discussed this before when we said that with federated identity, we explained the concept last session, day before yesterday, and we mentioned that there is no need to have multiple username and password for each cloud service provider. If you have multiple cloud service providers, and you can have a single credentials or LDAP server in your organization, and you can configure the federation between this server and the cloud service providers servers, then we will be able to utilize the user credentials and attributes from your organization LDAP server. And there are some concepts and protocols, which is the SAML, VSSAML, and OA authentication, OpenID, WS federation. These are protocols which it's used for the federated identity. Of course, SAML is considered the most popular and standard techniques in the federation process. In the SAML, we provide a concept called identity provider. We provide two concepts, identity provider and service provider. Service provider, it is a cloud service provider who is hosting the service. And the identity provider, it is the identity provider, it provides the user credentials. In this case, identity provider, it will be your organization, which it hosts the credentials, the LDAP credentials, and which it will be utilized by the cloud service provider who is providing the service to authenticate the service. In this case, it will provide the concept of single sign-on that you have only one user credential, and it will be utilized for all the username and password once when you logged in. There is no need to log into multiple servers. It's only one time login. Then this login, it will be utilized over the multiple servers or multiple cloud service providers. Multi-factor authentication, or 2FA, we discussed this in more details before. Okay, I think we are done.